See, like this.
I know.
Just
I know.
flies.
I know. You know.
What's his name?
Mateo.
Mateo.
Not Mateo. Mateo.
You better know. Because what's gonna
Say it like you mean it.
What's gonna happen to you?
Damn, I know everyone's government is like, how, but Fanny, pronounce your last name.
Ferreira.
She gonna sit right here.
Herrera.
She gonna sit right there.
Count. Do give it to me. The booklet, the booklet.
It's got a lot of matcha.
She's good.
What did you get?
She gonna sit on
Just a tea, an iced tea.
Oh, okay.
She gonna sit on her chair.
Like,
If I have to make reference, I want to.
I'm gonna kind of thing, federal, state, and so that's why the setup is like that.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay, but you're saying, I'm sorry. Oh, federal, state, and local.
That's gonna be the main things, and then some of the questions are just gonna come out organically.
Okay.
But, you know, I'm gonna lean on you to really explain some section 9 stuff and why, essentially, public housing is social housing, because section 9 is, you know, family investment center, section 9 says, because other laws don't have that. I know you know that, but you know, it's just conveying that to folks, and then what are we doing on the federal level right now? And it's setting limit right now, as well as different RAs and TAs. What are we doing outside of the RAs, TAs?
By organizing our race teams, right? Okay.
But now, I find this the best.
Okay, so then they've got local non-RPPH.
It's funny. I was looking at the definition for social housing. So they say equity. They say democratically, right, represented, and
Everything but the
Everything
word
but
public.
everything that is Section 9
Right.
public housing.
That's what it says.
Right now.
They're literally copying it.
So, no, well, the reason Section 9 public housing did not become that until 1969.
As much as you can so that you're like side by side.
Oh, so that might grab it, Manny, that one for Teresa. So this one's for Teresa. How long is the panel?
It's from 11:30 to 2:30, I think.
But this is the first one, right?
How long is the panel, you say?
Yeah, it's an hour?
Is it all together?
Right, because there's another panel behind us right today.
Is there another panel behind us?
When y'all get there.
I just,
Sorry, I'm gonna use it.
Oh,
oh no, yes ma'am, I'm sorry.
it's okay.
You got me in trouble.
We're trying to
Logan.
support you.
You got me in trouble.
No, we're trying to.
Hey everyone, good oh, is it still morning? I think it's good afternoon now, right? No. All right, or good noon. My name is Christina Chase. I never know how to locate myself. I'm a public housing resident, and I have other hats, but we're here today, and we being a lot of experts and knowledgeable policymakers and organizers and activists who know their stuff and are here to present the case to say that public housing is social housing. And hopefully we can really share with you the importance it is in our lives, but why we're hoping to continue to expand and reinvigorate public housing. And so I guess I'm just gonna share a few slides to contextualize US public housing, since some of the conversation will be international. And I get out my own way. So first and foremost, just to locate ourselves and where we are right now in our time-space coordinates and the lands that we occupy, and that of the Lenape people, but also as a Queens resident, Canarsie, Matenacaq, and Lewake people. It's important to understand the people who come before us, who currently share time and land with us, and whose futures are interconnected with ours. And so I'm really critical of now land acknowledgements, to be honest, but I'm hoping to figure out how we can really center Indigenous folks in the future of public housing and social housing in general. And so also locating myself, I come from education research, and it was really critical race theory that helped me understand the world and helps me understand public housing as well as public education. And one of the things within public education that I think is understudied, and I'm gonna quote, even though I shouldn't read from slides, but this is just the one quote I will read from. Critical race theory often ignores, quote, that the nation was premised on property rights, not human rights, and that the intersection of race and property could serve as a powerful analytic tool for explaining social and educational inequities. And so I started my own research with critical race theory, looking at public education, but then I came across a lot of the parallels of public education with regards to neoliberal policies and segronomics, or the political economy of segregating folks, and started looking at public housing and seeing that the parallels were kind of the same, and that there's a constant struggle for the right to housing and the right to education and the right to a lot of our public benefits that when we acquire is taken away from us. And I feel like that's the constant struggle. And leaning on the idea that both the federal government and the private industry and banks work together to continually displace Black and Brown communities, and the wealth that we create within them, I can't help but look at public housing and think that it's the same thing. And so there are a few, this is just I don't know if you can see Manny, but this is just a little timeline of some of the housing policies, and it's not at all inclusive of the lawsuits that really made public housing accessible to Black and Brown folks, because in its origin, it was made for white middle class families. And it wasn't until the Civil Rights Acts, as well as a lot of lawsuits during the 70s and 80s that really led to people having access to public housing. But I know that we only have a few minutes to go through this. What I wanted to focus on was the idea that, or the lens in which HUD is kind of the owner of public and Indian housing and land. And to really understand that HUD maintains a legacy of undermining community sovereignty and dishonoring the rights and freedoms of Black, Asian, Latinx, and Indigenous communities. I'm gonna slow down. I need some water. I wanted to share a few statistics to kind of give a picture to what NYCHA is, because not everyone understands NYCHA. Thank you so much. I'm really hot. I'm not gonna read from the slides. I'm just gonna speak from my heart. Thank you. So for folks who may not know, like NYCHA in its own right is a city of its own. We have over 500,000 people. Our average income is, well, these statistics need to be updated, but less than $30,000. And our rent is the most affordable, right? Because it's 30% of our income. And it's the truest form of housing security, because even at 30% of income, if I lose my job, it's still 30% of income, and I don't lose my housing. And I think often about how that's not the case for many of my friends and family members who don't have the same housing security that public housing provides. And to speak to the fact that, thank you, our residential tenure is about 24 years, which is phenomenal because if I'm not mistaken, I think the average is about 5 years, right? For a tenure, for residential tenure of the average unit. And so I think often about how this tenure allows us to really build community, to really understand, to create programs for each other. I think about how mutual aid programs is what housing always has been and how we look out for each other. But I wanted to speak to it because I think how public housing isn't looked at as the housing security that private housing is. But how often do you see someone staying within their own community for 24 years and really being able to serve that community? And so since we've gotten the right to public housing, we've seen a lot of disinvestment, but also a lot of white flight. About 90% of public housing is Black and brown folks. And I think often about who comprises public housing, and it's families. It's we have elders, we have children, and a large percentage of whom are women. And I think of the Black women who raised me, to think of the fact that 41% of households are headed by ages 62 and older. I think of all the abuelitas who continue to be part of extended families, and who are the ones that are most vulnerable when it comes to the policies that are impacting NYCHA. I'm gonna kind of speak to the disinvestment. So since the 70s, we see a huge disinvestment and turn towards investing in other alternatives of subsidized housing that actually benefits the private industry, including investors and developers. But that's not the true story of HUD, right? It's always been a struggle of the people fighting back for what they want. I think in the last several years, we can see, hey, I'm gonna center myself. So I think about how we continue to struggle for public housing, but how we are continuously let down by our political leaders. The most being, unfortunately, President Obama, who in 2012 signed the Rental Assistance Demonstration Act, which has really led to the further privatization of public housing by intending to convert Section 9 public housing into Section 8 housing. And as we continue to fight that, we're also in New York City also fighting the Preservation Trust. So for RAD and in New York City's application of it, PACT, the current model of Section 9 public housing, where we get direct federal government funding, is then changed into the hands of private management and private landlords. That funding no longer goes back to the people. But moreover, it's about us having the right to that funding, and that funding going to other programs that really lead to self-sufficiency and collective determination, which we'll talk about during the panel. And then just to kind of update folks on how RAD Impact has been implemented in New York City, we've had almost 16,000 units converted since 2016. And in 2021, Governor Hochul signed into law the Preservation Trust, which we will discuss during our panel, but essentially puts our homes into the hands of a debt model is applied to our homes, and essentially bonds are used and backed by our property. And it essentially makes us vulnerable to foreclosure, as well as putting our fate into Section 18, which allows the PHAs to apply to either dispose. It's disposition and demolition. So to either get rid of our units or to demolish it. And so Section 18 is something we'll discuss, of course, during the panel, but it's really scary because it's the same part of the law that's been used to get rid of public housing across the nation. And now it's here in New York City. And so one of the things that we are working on right now is informing residents of the different policies that are occurring. And since the Preservation Trust, although this was supposed to be only geared for 25,000 units, if I'm not mistaken, it's kind of coerced all of developments to participate in the conversion. So essentially, NYCHA has the intention for every development to be transitioned or converted to a Section 8 subsidy. And although they're giving residents the option to vote, which by the way was because of resident activism, because prior they were intending to put way more into the trust, way more units without any residential vote. But after a lot of organizing and activism, we were able to have that number lowered and have the right to vote, which, I mean, is a big deal, yes, because at least there's some form of consent, but it's also questionable if our options are predetermined for us, right? And so essentially, NYCHA intends for every development to vote on the three options of the future for their development. One being RAD Impact, one being the trust, and one being Section 9, which they love to call the status quo to kind of ideologically manipulate us into participating in not investing in Section 9. More to come during the panel. But I think that's why we're doing the work that we do right now, to remind people of what Section 9 is and why it's important and how it's different from from Section 8, essentially. And in no way do we want to throw shade at Section 8 because we understand what it's done for families and for people in general thus far, but we don't want our Section 9 units converting into Section 8. And there's other stuff, but we're gonna hop into the panel. I just wanted to make a note that, at least for myself, I'm at the tension of, I do want to change public housing, but I also don't trust the state to carry any meaningful policy out. And so I don't know what the future looks like, but I'm not going to put my hands into the state to answer that for me. I believe in the power of the people, and that's why I've been organizing. I believe in mutual aid models. Thank you. And we're trying to figure out that together, because we want to say public housing, but we know NYCHA is not the answer, right? And we're going to get into that too, because a public housing authority isn't necessarily something that's for and of the people either. And so how do we really create social housing that's for the people, of the people, and by the people? And I'll stop there. There's some books that kind of inform my stuff. I just wanted to highlight how much ability comes into it. That's kind of where I wanted to go with the age stuff, but disability is so central to how I see things in addition to class and race. And I think that we really have to highlight it, especially when it comes to looking at public housing, because it was ADA and like Section 504 that allowed us to get certain wins. Unfortunately, not on the premise of racial discrimination, but disability discrimination. And so I think those are just important things to know, and some tensions when it comes to abolition and decolonization, but I'm gonna hop into the panel. So thank you. I'm gonna leave it on the overview just so that it's there. But thank you. I'm gonna have everyone introduce themselves so I can stop talking and drink some water. But the people who stand before me are people I've just continuously been learning from, and who truly, I don't want to get teary yet, who truly inspire me every day to just keep going and to really be an expert. So I'm going to pass it to the Section 9 expert that I know. And before we hop in, we're just going to do quick intros before we hop into the questions.
My name is Manny Martinez. I am the elected resident council for South Jamaica Houses, which is a public housing development in Queens. I was elected by the community there, and then I was also elected by the presidents in my district, in the Queens South District, to be the chair of the Queens South District. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Watuke Ini Naru. My colonial name is Ramona. And I am the founder of Safe Section 9, which is a coalition working nationally to educate and activate tenants on the reasons why we need to maintain public housing, expand it, and doing that by via the creation of policy or amendments at the federal level. I apologize that I'm on my phone. My intern and my mom are like working an event for me right now, so they've got a lot of questions. So I'm gonna have to do that.
Yes, hello, my name is Beverly McFarland. I am the resident council president for Senator Robert A. Taft Houses in East Harlem. And I'm also on the steering committee for RPPH, which is Resident to Preserve Public Housing, which is, we fight on a state level to advocate to save Section 9 also. So we go to Albany and Washington to make sure these policies and procedures are we advocate for our residents to save and funding.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Vernell Robinson, and I am the lead organizer for an organization that's newly started, NYCHA Neighbor Helping Neighbors, of which we're gonna have to change the name, take it away from NYCHA, it's okay. We are based out in Rockaway, Queens, and we are organizing within the 5 developments to raise the conscious level of folks so that they are aware of what's going on. So we're educating and organizing folks so that we can get them involved with the fight. Right now, presently, with so many groups and organizations fighting for the same cause, which is to save Section 9, we need the folks at the ground to work with us. And so that's what we're primarily doing out in Rockaway. It's just waking folks up and getting them involved.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brenda Temple. I am a member of Committee for Independent Community Action, founded by Dr. Lenore Fulani, a social psychologist. I live in Oceanside Houses in Far Rockaway, Queens. I am the second vice president, and along with Sika, I work with Safe Section 9, RPPH, Justice for All, and any and all people who care that want to save public housing, the hardworking, low-income residents that are the backbone of this society from privatization, which will lead to evictions, displacement, and the dismantling of our communities as we know it. We know that we are invaluable to this city, to this country, and we demand that we have our human rights. We demand a quality of life where we live so that we can love on our families like everyone else. And so that's why we're here to fight today.
Hi, my name is Teresa Scott. As you can see, I am a Black disabled woman that has been working as an advocate for over 35 years. I'm a former TA member. Now I'm working with Save Helping Neighbors and Save Section 9. I also work with the Black maternal health group called Postpartum Awareness. I'll actually be leaving later on. I won't be able to stay, but being part of this group and our people, we need safe housing. And so I'm here to make sure that when I leave that my mouth is loud with a direct message that save my home, make sure that I can stay in there. I want Section 9, nothing else but Section 9. Okay. And I'm complete.
It just makes sense. Okay, well, starting on the idea that social housing is public housing or vice versa. Manny, I would love for you to explain what Section 9 is and how it is like no other housing policy, and the ways in which it, although of course, we fought for it, the kind of what it is today, the ways in which it allows for self-determination and collective determination.
Definitely. Thank you. So, Section 9, public housing, what we have today, right? We all understand that the Housing Act of 1937 is what started public housing in this country. Public housing at that time was exclusively for whites, and there was a strong push for integration. And during that push is when public housing became integrated, segregated, and then we had some strong circumstances of rents being raised, repairs not happening, and having apartments abandoned without any, with complete disregard, really putting the community in danger. There was a St. Louis rent strike back in 1969. Now, St. Louis is not a large housing authority, right? I think Queens, the 10 or the 14 developments in Queens is larger than St. Louis. But they did a 9-month rent strike that then got the attention, that almost bankrupted the St. Louis Housing Authority and got the attention of Edward Brooks, who put together the Brooke Amendment that made Section 9 public housing what it is today. So Section 9 public housing is what it is since 1969, not since 1937. And that is a redistribution of government funding back into the community. At that time, there was the huge white flight. That was when there was FHA loans, 0% to or low interest loans. We wasn't getting that, and blacks was not able to, they were completely disbarred from that. So public housing became the alternative to that, for them to gain home ownership, for them to become entrepreneurial with tenant, at that time it's called tenant management corporations. Now it's resident management corporations, which is still there, in which they could purchase public housing units and sell it back to the households. Also, Section 5H in the Housing Act allows for that kind of access to home ownership. Then you have Section 3 of 1968, which is supposed to utilize that HUD funds and reinvest it back into the community through training, through economic employment, career employment, and contracting, which is huge. And when you consider that 70% of public housing throughout the country is less than 1,000 units, that made a program like Section 3 very difficult to become successful. But when you look at a place like New York City that has the largest housing authority, New York City, the public housing authority in New York City is the second largest city in New York State. I think a lot of people have not really come to that understanding, is how large we are. 90% of that population is black, 95% of that population is black, Hispanic, and Asian. 90% is black and Hispanic. Now that there has been a conversion of close to or over 15,000 units, it went from 90% to 89%. So we're starting to see a depopulation of public housing. So when we look at public housing, Section 9, this is a civil rights era legislated policy that is focused on the economic mobility and equity of black communities, even though they don't say black communities, right? And they don't say race, it's economics, but it's predominantly black communities and Hispanic communities that are affected. And this is the only policy that deals with economic mobility, that deals with home ownership equity, and deals with business development, which is another key issue, the entrepreneurial factor of it, the ability for us to now bootstrap, take charge of the developments that we in, control management functions, and then ultimately purchase units and sell it back to the household so that they can enjoy and be a part of an equity event. Because we all know that the hugest barrier to our wealth is home ownership. The fact that those FHA loans were provided to whites-only covenants provided this equity growth for this specific population, and which was completely barred to our population, to the black, and then ultimately the Hispanic population after that. Public housing is meant to be a redistribution into the community in order for us to become entrepreneurial, self-sufficient, and independent. This has been thoroughly thwarted through racist policies from the state level. A lot of people don't understand that the New York City Housing Authority or any public housing agency across the country is not public housing. They are a state entity that was created to go into a contract with HUD in order to get funding to run the Section 9 public housing program, which is to engage for economic mobility, home ownership equity, and business development. Because it is predominantly Black and Hispanic, it has been thoroughly obstructed. NYCHA since 1969, this is the last thing, I'll pass it back. We have to take note that in New York City, the amount of fundings that they receive is in the billions. From 2010 to 2020, $19.8 billion in contracts were actuated, 19.8. And during that time, under Section 3, there's a 10% mandate. There's a mandate to subcontract with Section 3 business concerns up to 10% of the at 10% of the contract value, not up to. The minimum is 10%. So just on the $19.8 billion over the last 10 years, we lost close to $1.5 billion in business development as households. And so now if you look at that kind of barrier and obstruction to the reinvestment into our communities, I've had a chief of public safety that is a housing focused NYPD division say that you're 4 times more likely to be shot in a NYCHA development than anywhere else in the city. With just that type of investment back into our communities with business development, we would be one of the safest communities in this city, or if not in this country.
That's right.
And so this is what the impact is of obstruction. This is what the impact is of not realizing and knowing what we have at stake. Because a large part of this is us not knowing that we have it. Right? And so you know how they say, and I'm going to end it with this, you know how they say that knowledge is power? Well, I think that statement is wrong. The execution of knowledge is power. Just knowing it doesn't help you. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Go ahead. As you spoke right now, it made me think of how much money goes into policing our communities instead of actually making it safe in ways that are authentic. Before, and also as you spoke, I think I can't help but think about the political context, particularly in which the Fair Housing Act was passed. Like, it was, I think, a week within Martin Luther King Jr. being assassinated. This was the government's response to try to quell the riots that were happening across the country. I know this was April of 1968. And then this was August of 1968. And this wasn't just like, oh, the government's gonna do something good. No, it was because we were riding on the streets. People were setting fires. No shade to arsonists. But I just think about the fact that this wasn't given to us, this was fought for. And every time we let go a little bit, that's when they take it back. And so I'm gonna lean on you, Ramona, to kind of illuminate what's the current political struggle, especially on the federal level.
So following up on Manny's points, it's really important to note that we have a program that at its core is the most robust, the most affordable, the best thought out housing policy in the United States and probably in the developing countries. But the key to that being fulfilled is all of our neighbors getting to the point where they can speak to this issue, like Manny, right? What has happened over the last 30 years, along with the decline in support financially and in the failures and the corruptions that we've seen in the housing authorities in multiple states, because that's not unique to New York. Anytime that there's billions of dollars involved and people have very little oversight, you're going to end up with corruption, right? So Safe Section 9 recognized this early on, and I happen to enjoy policy. I'm that weird kid that can read it and can translate it to be able to be ingested by someone with a 4th grade education. And I think that's the strength of our group, because when you think about the community that resides in public housing, We have folks that are coming from being work driven, right? So like my grandmother moved into public housing, ended up living there for 33 years, but she had a third grade education in the Dominican Republic. She never spoke English, which I think is a superpower, living in America for like that long and never learning a word of English takes a lot of determination, and I think Dominicans do it really, really well. So I just want to shout out my people for that. But she went into public housing after working in factories, right? The minute she got here, she was working as a seamstress, and my mom was able to reach a little bit more, but she had a 5th grade education, right? I was the first person in my family to make it to college, then to grad school, and then to Kennedy at Harvard. That doesn't happen unless my family has housing security and our rent is not affected by our income. It just doesn't, right? I went from my life, I've seen myself earning $7,000, which is what I earn now, to 100 and something working for the Department of Defense. I've been at every level, and public housing allows you to do that. There's a couple misconceptions that we try to educate people on. One is, Christina mentioned the tenure, right? Finding upward mobility doesn't mean you have to leave public housing. And I think those two things are often intertwined. I love living in public housing. Right. I love my community. I love the elders that now have become not substitutes, but fill-ins for my grandmothers that have both passed away, and my granddads as well, right? So everyone knows me since I was 12. You don't get that in a lot of neighborhoods anymore in New York City. And that cohesive community is not something that can be duplicated when people have to constantly hunt and search for their next apartment. One of the jokes that I like to make is that if you go on Craigslist in any main city in America, everything in the free section is a year old. And it's because y'all keep having to move every year. Pay attention to those things, right? That's a clue as to what's happening in your community. I love it because I'm a DIY person, so I just go around and pick up stuff and make new stuff out of it. But if everyone in your community is having to leave after a year, that transient economy never stabilizes, right? When we look at being a business owner, we participated in a study that is now actually leading to policy changes in how Section 9 rights are enforced for being a business owner. I have a small company. I've vended here at the People's Market a couple times. I make gift items inspired by my indigenous identity. My company made $22,000 last year. And I have like 2 interns and my mom right now swinging it in an Uber. Like, I can take time to develop products that I care about, to represent my history, my identity, and make things of value and price them in a way where I'm actually honoring the artisans and myself, because I don't have the pressure of seeing myself becoming displaced or unhoused if my company doesn't make a certain amount of money. My rent is $78 a month. Let that sink. Mm-hmm. Who doesn't want to live in New York City, in a great community, surrounded by people that you love, that love you back? And you should be able to have that regardless of what your income level is, right? Another thing I want to highlight is like, how do we actually do the education, right? So we hold trainings. The first one is the history of public housing. You can see it on YouTube or our Facebook group under Safe Section 9. And the second one is lobby training for public housing tenants and allies. In these trainings, we actually develop our neighbors so that they can start having the conversation. It's almost like a Ponzi scheme. So I'd like to identify one tenant per building, and then that tenant goes on and finds another tenant and another tenant, and we sell them the vision of public housing, right? We speak about the things that Manny highlighted. We make sure that they understand that a bathroom remodel is not worth losing $1.4 billion. That a new kitchen is not worth losing your stability, right? So often tenants are being romanced by the Housing Authority New York and in other places, right? Starting with Chicago. Chicago was the first place where Section 18 was successfully applied. And 20 years later, those tenants have not gone back. Less than half of them have returned to Chicago Central. Where did the rest of that community go, right? After that building blew up, I remember that was 19 20 years ago. How old was I? I'm 42, 22. I remember watching the TV and being like, what the hell? And our buildings are still standing, but Fulton and Chelsea, Manhattan, is being threatened with 3 options. Demolition, which is Section 18, rezoning and infill, which doesn't honor the tenants and becomes unaffordable housing, or RAD, which is you stay in your unit as they rehabilitate that space. None of those options are wanted by the tenants. So we're being told that tenants are gonna chain themselves to radiators, right? So if you're worried about homelessness, if you walked here today and you saw all of these Black and brown people on the street talking about meth, talking about where they need to go to the clinic, pay attention. They're there because there is no housing in New York City that will hold them, humanize them, and support them. And as a kid from New York, I'm quite comfortable because I'm like, oh, we're back in the 80s. Okay, I know how to move. I can dress for this. But we shouldn't get that comfortable with it again, right? And things are returning to that crisis point because of this. The final point that I'll add is like, how does the policy then get impacted? So we have a set of national solutions which have we've come up with as a collective of tenants and organizations. And those national solutions all get turned into policy or amendments to specific policy. So instead of us saying, we're gonna fight for NYCHA and just asking for money, when you look at our national solutions on our website, you're gonna notice that our ask of 80 billion, which is what we know that public housing needs for 1 million households across the USA, to get actually up to code and not be in violation, it's like number 7 or 8. There's a reason why we're not focusing on the money, because there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, like stopping privatizations, like supporting us in the path to home ownership, like looking at why we don't get, positive marks for paying our rent on time. Because the last conversation that they had on rent and public housing focused on ERAP, right? And you heard the housing authority go around saying that they can't function because we don't pay our rent. But pre-COVID, we were paying our rent at like 80% on time. 80 to 85 of the tenants were paying their rent on time in full every month. So there is not a culture of rent ignorance in our community. There's been a crisis where NYCHA tenants were dying and getting becoming contagious to COVID at twice the rate of the rest of you. So every single leader here has either been to too many funerals or has dealt with too many losses, has been hit financially, right? Because we're not getting the training, the development, and the resources that NYCHA used to do back in the 70s and 80s after we fought for it. And we're being asked to cope and to function in an environment that makes us physically, mentally, and emotionally sick. Look at everybody here with a cane. It's not by chance, right? So it's like I tell people when we do panels like this, like you need to be connecting the dots. Because if anything that I'm saying is just hitting you, there's something wrong with like your vision, and a doctor's not gonna point it out for you. I'll close by saying that we work with the tenants and we work with allies to do this work. Tenants like Teresa, who's passionate, let's say, about one specific policy, will lead the focus on that. Teresa's really passionate about grants. So we look for allies and partners that can support in taking her thoughts, her ideas, and her visions and executing that as a grant or executing that as a policy. So we're always looking for donations because we also do this for free. So we have really dope assets and videos and resources and toolkits, but that's all created by people that are giving their time. So if anyone's interested in supporting us, those are ways that you can. And then with that, unless you have like something else you want me to drop, I'll pass it back to you, Christina.
Thank you. Are we gonna come to you?
That was a lot. Thank you so much for the new bathrooms that Ramona was talking about. That's part of the RAD and the ways in which NYCHA is trying to set the propaganda that, oh, if you buy into ROD, you'll get new renovations, this and that, the kind of renovations you won't get through Section 9, which is not necessarily true. You will still get them, just not as quickly. However, we know that we are losing our rights through that conversion. And so that's why we're going hard with fighting against the trust. And I'm going to pass it to Beverly to illuminate the current state battle that we're having right now. I don't want to say battle. This is what we're talking about. The movement right now when it comes to at the state level. So she's going to speak to that.
Yes. So so at the state level, I'm on the steering committee for RPPH, and at the state level, we have different policies and procedures that we want to implement, or changes to the amendments to the legislation that's out, the trust legislation that's out. People have to understand that these are bills, 964 regulations are being validated from NYCHA. We have the 964 regs has been validated. The trust should never have been implementing based on the 964 regs. In the 964 regulations, it states that NYCHA should not have went into any other policies if they had an active consent decree. And there's an active consent decree about mold and the mold and lead and asbestos. So no other apartment, they should have never entered into any agreement. A lot of times people think this section, my major concern is to fight against the trust, because it is going to have a negative impact on our communities under the Section 18. NYCHA did not have to add the Section 18, which is demolishment, in this legislation, because they had an opportunity to put rehab opposed to demolition. So they intentionally put the Section 18. So because they don't want to be in real estate business anymore. And they don't want to serve our people. They have the money. Now the disinvestment of everyone failed us. The state, the city, and the federal government failed us and failed our communities. And now we have a mayor and a governor that is taking state and city money and invested into private partnerships. So when is that legal? Because public money, state and city, is public money. So why are you giving it to private developers? That multi-million-dollar developer, unless you're in the bed with them. So we have to understand and educate, and that's what we do at at RPPH, is educate our resident leaders to educate their residents of the negative impact that if they go into this RAD pack or trust conversions, this is what's going to happen to our community, the disinvestment of our communities. And really, that affordable housing, they saying affordable housing, but affordable to whom? Affordable is not affordable to whom? So, I know in my community, I'm looking at all these big apartment buildings going up, and not one of my residents. I have 1,500 residents that I govern, and not one of them are eligible for all these apartment buildings that's going up around me. So I fight like hell for saving Section 9. I'm passionate. I'm 100% passionate about making sure we save our homes under Section 9. And important things that it takes for us to make sure we do that. So it's education, teachings, like Ramona, you guys, you're advocating for, is teaching our communities, because a lot of residents feel the same way. They getting a new kitchen and bathroom. Oh, I'm excited. I can't wait. We finally getting this done. But the lowest, but at the lowest cost of, at what cost are you getting this things done? It should have been done. Because now you have private management, and then not the same safeguards of under Section 9 that we have. The secession rights are not going to be there. There's numerous of things. And then Section 8 is a policy. You have to go into Section 8 with criterias. And a lot of our residents don't fit criterias. I know, Ramona, I understand, and I wish I had $72 rent, but I've been working 38 years. My rent was $1,200 when I was working. Now I'm retired, it went down. But I'm talking about, first it was $1,600, then it went to $1,200, then it went down. But people have this perception that NYCHA residents pay this low rent. And if you are working class, I worked at the hospital for 38 years, and I didn't have that luxury of paying $100 rent. But
That's what happens with disability.
But again, it was affordable to me to be able to raise my 2 children and now getting them through college. So it was for me as a single parent. So that was, it was affordable to me. And again, there was a community that helped me raise my children. I can go to my neighbor and say, listen, can you pick my children up I'm working late? And that was important to me. So this stereotype of saying that we are ignorant and animals, it is not. We are a community.
Go ahead. Let me hold on to it.
One thing I want to, amplify that Beverly just shared is the idea that we're not mixed income, right? I think we need to really examine that, because while I am blessed right now by being denied, unemployable, and not supported by our infrastructure, there are people that are like 10% of people that live in public housing make more than $100,000 a year. So our incomes range from me, who's making 0, to tenants in my development that spent their lives working either in public service or in the private sector and are making more than $100,000 a year and are paying 30% of their income, right? And this is why public housing succeeds.
Yes.
Because what I can't pay at this moment, my neighbors that make 100+ are paying, right? So we fill in the gaps for each other.
And also we fill in the gaps in the ways we are there for each other. The first person to watch my baby was my neighbor, not even my mom. It was my neighbor. When I'm thankful for her, shout out to Tracy. And so thinking of how, actually that's the perfect segue, literally with neighbors, helping neighbors, what does it look like? And we're gonna lean into on the local level with the 3 of you. What does the everyday struggle look like on the grounds when we're informing residents on this and empowering them and activating them? What does it look like, and what are the current things that we're facing?
Okay, so while a lot of folks are totally unaware of what's going on, when you come to them, like we've had a meeting with Safe Section 9 April 14th, and I can't begin to tell you how much outreach was done to get folks to just come and listen to hear, because I feel we have a say. We're coming and understand how we got into this mess, learn the history of NYCHA. So then that when we get to understanding what this vote is all about, then we can make an informed decision and get, be involved. But it's like pulling teeth. Folks are, and I use this term all the time, despondent, because, first of all, I think a lot of them are traumatized and having to live in the conditions that they've had to live in for so long, And so, like a lot of the residents, they ask me, well, what do you think we should do? And I don't want to say to them what I think we should do, because I need you to understand what's going on. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of them are just, it's hard. It's just really hard trying to get through to them, for them to just hear something different, hear something that, okay, there's hope, because they lost it, for so long. Like I was saying. So with Neighbor Helping Neighbors, we're spending the time with our neighbors, phone calling, going to their home, sitting down, talking with them, trying to really engage them into what's going on, to plug them into Safe Section 9, the folks that are really advocating and fighting to make sure that Section 9 is saved. Because our job primarily is to just reach out to them, get them involved. Because like I was sharing earlier, there's organizations everywhere trying to save Section 9, all right? But the people are not there. The people are not there. And so we're desperately trying to get the people at the table, so then that they can understand what's going on. For them to understand how important their vote is, because as it stands now, it's what, 20%, and that's crazy. So I'm figuring we're figuring that we can get 20% of the residents engaged, involved, informed, it'll change the dynamic, But it's a slow process, and we all expected it to be that way, because like I said, a lot of folks in public housing are traumatized, and so it's gonna take time, for them to believe, trust, have faith, and, hope again. But I'm happy to say, like, for that first meeting, there were, I think I counted like 36 people had attended from just one development, and we're working now on 2 other developments for this meeting we're going to have on the 17th. And I'm really hopeful that there'll be more people there. And as we go along, more and more people will get involved, simply to hear. Because I figure if we can jar their brain just slightly, to get them to question things, then possibly, more will get involved to want to fight for their homes. People love public housing, they love what they have and all the rest of that, but they don't get what's going on in public housing right now, that we're about to lose it. And driving that urgency in, it's a slow process, but I have every bit of faith that it's gonna work out. Like I said, when I introduced myself, we're just starting out with this outreach effort. And okay, so yeah, it's one of the things that we're doing to try to engage folks or get them involved is we're doing this survey. And the survey is designed to not only gain an understanding of what they know, all right, and to provide them with information, but we did a report about 2 years ago, and we found that 1/3 of the residents that live in Rockaway public housing, their physical health had been impacted by their living conditions, okay, and 1/4 of them mentally. So we want to follow up to find out with those same people we surveyed 2 years ago, it was over 700 of them. And we've been reaching out to those folks first to try to, like I said, engage them, get them to understand what's going on. We spend time, it's like a 5-page survey. So, you can't do it over there. You can't just do it like that. So we do come back and we spend the time with them. They ask questions. Like I said, I was very happy to see that so many of them had attended that first meeting. Because like I said, it's going to be a slow process, but we didn't get to where we are overnight. You know what I'm saying? And so it's going to take, while we do our piece, others are doing their piece, and then we all come together and we'll be able to fight this thing.
I want to piggyback and make get clear how important that survey is. So this is a survey that when we do our lobby meetings, so once allies and tenants go through that training, we put a lead tenant with support from Safe Section 9 members that are allies or like leaders within Safe Section 9. And one of the pieces of evidence that we're using to really drive the drafting of an amendment to that RAD legislation that Christina shared, that Obama initiated, is the survey results, because it talks also about the increase in evictions and the increase in rents. So Neighbors Helping Neighbors and the Human Rights Watch survey, which is probably the only campaign that Human Rights Watch has ever done that has not gone and turned sexy and global and been distributed massively, which tells you a lot about the disdain that people have for public housing. Because there was the incident in my community on June 4th during the Black Lives Matters marches that became one of their reports as well. And that impacted about 200 New Yorkers and led to all types of prizes, led to lawsuits, and led to payouts to the victims. And this survey focused on public housing, was national, and looked at 1 million households, and it didn't make a bleep in the media, right? So when we go in to speak to Congress, we use their results and we use Human Rights Watch to make sure that we can prove to them the dangers of privatization through RAD, PAC. So we say project-based Section 8 and Section 18. And without those statistics, Congress people are just sitting there like, well, why do you want to why do you want to continue to live in an apartment that's making you sick? When you show them the alternative, which is like, we're going to be displaced, our rent is going to go up to 40% of our income. And for someone on fixed income, like our seniors, which are like 40% of our population, then are disabled and unemployable like myself, which are like 20% of the population, we can't afford an increase from 30 to 40%. So Neighbors Helping Neighbors, and Brenda might talk about this, is like, there's this trend where our neighbors disappear overnight. Once privatization comes in, you start seeing that whole apartments are being put in the trash. So everyone's life, belongings, treasures get dumped out by NYCHA and the property manager that comes in at a rate that's really scary. So we start seeing that the apartments become empty and people are disappearing from our community immediately after conversions. And that wasn't visible until Human Rights Watch and Neighbors Helping Neighbors did those surveys.
Also, I wanted to piggyback off something you said in terms of 20%. Now, with the new legislation, each development has they can do 20%. Well, actually, they had it for 10%. We had to advocate at Safe Section 9, as well as RPPH and other entities. We all advocated for to increase it to 66%, and NYCHA of the decide and vote for each development.
So 20% of
head of households within them, that development have to vote which housing policy program they want to go in to. So we was able to fight for 66% we asked, and NYCHA only agreed to bring it up to 20%. So now you have for my development now, only 150 people out of 1,500 people can say what program they go into. That's scary.
Yes, it is.
Especially when they're not knowledgeable of the negative impact.
God forbid they need a new tub.
So that's all they're saying, and they don't understand that this Section 8 that they're telling them, they are so excited because they think they're going to move out the city. They don't understand is project-based Section 8, and it attaches to an apartment. It is never going to attach to. It's never attaching to you. Your name will never be on that voucher. It goes to the apartment. So it's basically it belongs to the developer. And then Section 8 also, each developer gets $650 on top of whatever the market rent is for those apartments.
It's a huge
And it's a huge windfall for those developers. And then they have the opportunity to borrow up to $40 billion of money, finances through private funding through banks. So if they do default, what happens? And everyone know NYCHA has always been sticky-handed.
Yeah.
So, and mismanaging our dollars. So what happens then? Then the banks will own our property and we will be on the streets.
Real quick, so that's why when I shared that, like, folks come to me and ask, like, what do you think? I share the truth with them as to what I think, but I share with them that it's so important that they understand, that they really have to understand, because when NYCHA comes, like Beverly was saying, where I live is one building, 174 apartments. So what is that? 20% was like 30, whatever, for
70. So that's like
whatever that number is. But at the end of the day, it is critical that we reach as many people as possible. That's why I said it was only 36 members or residents from my building who attended that first meeting, but that was good.
Yeah, but that's great.
That was good.
That's your 20%.
Exactly. And that's the whole key to this thing. Education, education, education. Getting them informed about what's going on. Not trying to sway anybody about anything, for them to have their own mind, for them to be able to make because I don't know when they go behind the door, however this vote is gonna go, how they're gonna vote. You know what I'm saying? That's why I say to them, you have to really understand the facts so you can make an informed decision and not just go with what's glossy. Yeah.
A new tub refrigerator.
Right.
Well, I know Ms. Brenda has seen with her own eyes the evictions, and I wanted to share this number. So in January 2022, NYCHA had 486 units deemed vacant and available for move-in. A year later, February 2023, that number is 3,593, a 640 increase. So in 1 year, a 300% increase in vacancies. And this isn't even including the 1,000 units that they took off the list because they need repairs. This is just vacant units. And so considering evictions on top of these vacant units, how do you make sense of this? Because to me, I see it as intentional. And you're on the grounds and you see it more and how it's impacting communities.
And so you're talking about in public housing, Section 9, that these evictions are taking place.
Well, I'm talking about the vacancies in Section 9 and
The
what you've
vacancies.
seen with the conversions into Section 8, the evictions. How are we making sense of essentially displacement and not prioritizing people's housing?
Yeah, okay, so as you know, I'm with SICA, Committee for Independent Community Action, and what we are is a grassroots organization that's completely and totally independent. So we do not have any restraints on how we advocate for what issues we're focused on. It was during the Bloomberg administration, the de Blasio administration, we had collected over 20,000 signatures of people who either were residents of public housing or people that cared about what's going on in public housing. And we used that to try to influence Mayor de Blasio to have the willingness to get the funding to us that we so desperately need. But unfortunately, it's an uphill battle with these elected officials because they feel that their hands are tied. They don't have the willingness to stand up and fight for what they know is right. I don't know how they sleep at night.
Right.
In terms of the evictions, I live in Oceanside, which is in Far Rockaway, Queens. I live across the street from a recently RAD converted development. We used to be all one development under one name, but what they did was they went to one side across the main street, and they were bringing PowerPoint presentations to the people. I attended some of them. I asked questions that they couldn't answer. or they weren't willing to answer. And I remember one lady saying, this development is targeted. And I said, what? Targeted? You know, so we already know that they were already zeroing in on them. They already signed and crossed the I's and the T's and whatnot, and that this was going to happen without any say from the residents. And so since that time, well, what they did at the PowerPoint presentation, they said that they can take this Section 8. This is what they were feeding the people, other than as well as the shiny refrigerators, stoves, new cabinets, new flooring, paint job, bathtubs, sinks, which are still in disrepair, so to speak. They're falling apart. They're refurbished. People are very unhappy with the work that they've done. And it's all intentional, because we know at the end of the day, the low quality of repairs and changes that they made, they can come in and redo it for someone that's going to pay close to market rate, right? So they're just doing these minor repairs so that they can have their program in existence for the eventual changes that are the bottom line. I'm sorry, let me just think about, I know of people that during the Reconstruction, people have passed away because of the way the maintenance issues were taken care of. And there I'm talking about seniors, the debris that was in the house, the coming in and going out without having agreement to access, the quality of work that was done. Some people passed away. If you ever heard of Seneca Village, this whole thing reminds me of Seneca Village. Wow. That is now Central Park. Wow. You know, eminent domain, people were displaced, and it was a thriving community with people of all races coming together and working together hard to make their community successful and thrive. And they were doing well, but then the government came in, took over, and we don't know where these people went. They just like disappeared, ghosts. This is what's happening in Ocean Bay, the privatized development. I know just looking across the street during the first few years of the transition, that I saw a lot of almost whole households, furniture out in the street, out on the sidewalk. We happen to know that there have been more evictions in Ocean Bay than all of public housing in all the 5 boroughs of the city within the past 5 years. And the rents have gone up astronomically. I have friends, of course, there because we're a community. And one young lady got a job through Section 3, construction job. Her rent went up to $16,000 from a couple of hundred. And it went up within 1 month of her getting her first paycheck. And they calculated 1,600 from 1,600. I said 1,000? Yes. Oh, 1,600. How much she making? It went up within 1 month of her getting her first paycheck. And meanwhile, working in the construction industry, it's seasonal. Sometimes it depends on the weather. And so this is what the Wavecrest management, their calculations were that they would charge her this amount, counting it for her whole year's salary. Guess what she had to do? She quit. She had to quit her job.
Can you explain to everyone how that would have been handled in public housing?
Okay, so she quit her job in order to be able to afford her rent, under the circumstances. So to the contrary, under Section 9 public housing, if you get a job, you get a rate increase in your income, they give you a year before you recertify so that you can put that on your recertification. And then they make the adjustment to 30% of your income. Also, what's going on in Section 8 housing under RAD is that if you make over the eligibility of Section 8 help through HUD, your rent automatically goes up to market rate. You don't get that help from Section 8 that would pay so that you're not really paying 30% anymore. They're taking that program away, where it stops you from paying the 30% because you're not eligible for Section 8, and you go up to market rate. I know a lot of people also that have been moving out as a result of this. They said, I can't afford $2,000 a month. I say to them, stick and stay. Let's work on this. Let's try to work on this together, because anywhere else you go, you're going to pay more than $2,000. You're not going to have as many of the opportunities and the privileges, so to speak, even under Section 8. But of course, we're fighting to keep Section 9. We're fighting to stop the increase of these private developers coming in with their programs that we know the bottom line is profit over people. We say people over profit. But I wanted to read something that is going on right now. So Committee for Independent Community Action, we do outreach. We go out to the different developments in all 5 boroughs. We have surveys. We have petitions. We ask people to, if they are interested in what's going on in public housing, whether you live there or not, to sign our list. We'll put you on the mailing list because we meet every other Monday. And we talk about different developments and what's going on there in terms of creating, creating organizations so that the grassroots people, the people on the ground, the everyday people, the residents and those that care, can become leaders in their own communities and share the information and get people on board. That's what we're all talking about, is all hands on deck, all communities, all organizations coming together under the same focus of saving public housing. And so when we say all hands on deck, Committee for Independent Community Action, we have rallies, we do marches, we do outreach, we march in parades, we have town hall meetings, and we go to other organizations' town hall meetings and online Zoom trainings and teach-ins so that we can get people educated on different ways of approaching this crisis. Right now, I'm on a committee with the Controller's Office. Some residents of public housing are on this committee. And right now, we're working on audits. And the 2 audits that were chosen were repairs. How does NYCHA select contractors hired to conduct repair work? And what is the quality of work performed? What kind of evaluations are done? The second one is RAD-PACT. What are the eviction rates at RAD-PACT developments, and how have they changed since RAD-PACT conversions? And are the reasons for eviction different at the RAD and PACT developments? So we're looking forward to working with the Controller's Office to delve into and audit some of these issues. We really wanted to focus on financing, but what we're going to do, because they didn't vote on it, they didn't choose it, we are also going to implement, the financing with all of these things that we're talking about, because it all comes down to money. Yeah. I was grateful to be able to join Save Section 9 at the Poor People's Campaign. At the Poor People's Campaign in Washington, D.C., where we addressed Congress, about funding public housing. We came to collect our check. We know that they have the money, and we are asking for a change of heart, for the willingness for them to really focus on the ramifications of the people that, if this continues, what will happen to our communities? What will happen to your communities? The homeless shelters, they don't want us in the homeless hotels in your neighborhoods. So why don't you make the correct adjustments? Be humane in your actions, because there's going to be a pushback, and there's going to be, it's going to be detrimental to the city as we know it, to the country as we know it. So I just want to say that I'm very passionate. I love my community as well. And for me personally, if I came into some money, I would pay the 30%, or I would pay the market rate percent, because my community helped me get through a lot of tough times. My community, I moved up and out of public housing. I went out into the world as a professional. I became a Me Too person. As a result of many Me Too experiences, I dealt with it in the wrong way. You know, I got the help that I needed, and I had to start all over again. I was grateful that public housing was there for me.
All right.
And so I understand the plight and the fight of people that have to live in this society of systemic racism, marginalization, and disadvantages. And so, you know, I just thank you all for being here, and those that are listening, to know that we're in this together, all of us, no matter where you are in life. Thank you.
So I just wanted, when Ms. Vernell was talking about the trauma, like the trauma is real because it's state organized violence, right? No kid, unless you live in public housing, interfaces with the cops as much as we do every day.
Yes.
You know what I mean? No, I have to worry about whether or not my baby's breathing in asbestos. Like, that's not something that people have to frequently worry about. And so I think about a neighbor whose stove exploded last month in Ravenswood houses. Yeah. And thinking about the trauma of a fire, like and to think about the frequency in which fires happen within public housing developments because of faulty wiring, because of gas leakages. And that's the other thing. He had already expressed the gas leakages. NYCHA didn't do anything. And then thank God he has his life. But I think what brings us all together is that a lot of us are in our own processes of healing from the traumas that we've endured in our own housing experiences. And I think that's the contradiction of public housing, is it's both, we know the state which it is in is not healthy for us, but we also know the importance of it and the possibilities for it. And I think often of just what it meant for me moving from home to home before public housing to actually just have a place to call home and a community to lift me up. And so I'm going to ask Ms. Teresa to share her perspective and her experience with public housing. And then we're gonna open it up for questions to the audience. And I'm so happy because last but definitely not least, Ms. Teresa has just been such an inspiration to me. So I'm excited for everyone to hear from you.
I'm a very emotional person. When they were talking about the Seneca village, that kind of hit me because it's like they trying to wipe us out. There's no ifs, ands, buts about it. They're actually trying to wipe us out. First of all, let me say my name. My name is Teresa Lorraine. Teresa Lorraine Scott. I'm 64, gracefully walking into 65. And without living in NYCHA, I would not have the peace of mind that I have. So let's get back to the police part that Mr. Manny brought in. We are treated like animals when it comes to the police. So for them to be paying the police money to animalize, because it's not like, I had a police tell us, we were sitting on the bench, told us that we have to go in our cage. I remember one year I was sitting outside and I was having, I had my blood sugar had dropped down and I was very dizzy. And so there was a new, we call the captains, they come a white shirt. It was a new white shirt that came. And so he said to me, you have to go upstairs. And I'm like, sir, I'm not doing nothing. I'm sick. I'm about to pass out. I need to eat something. He was like, I don't care. If by the time I come back here, you better be in your building. And if I was not having a blood sugar, I would have sat my behind out there and dealt with the cop, because I was willing to face whatever, because I'm tired of being housed, controlled by police and NYCHA, because NYCHA is allowed. It's not like they're paying for them. So now if we had community policing who knew us and understanding something different, there's a big difference than you coming in like you're a Gestapo than you are a community police officer. Because the community police officers that I grew up in Manhattan, they knew my name. They knew you, that's right. And they were like, I'm gonna tell, my mother's name is Margaret Scott, she's gone now, thank God for mom. But they would tell, I'm gonna tell this one, I'm gonna tell that one. So it was like a tell. Getting back to the, NYCHA puts out a lot of fake news.
Yes.
You not on Facebook be saying fake news? They think, even my own family don't come visit me because they feel like I live in a horrible place, but they don't, and I love my family, and I have a few people that come, but they don't come see me. They don't come check to make sure because I had my family said to me the other day, the reason why we don't come to you because we don't like the way you live it, okay? But I've lived through stuff, but I got a family at NYCHA. I could call, there was a time where I couldn't get in my bed. It was my neighbor that came help me lift my legs up and get in my bed. So I can't do that at my parents' house because my father lived in steps and my father's 85. I don't want to live with my dad at 85. I'm 64. I need to be in my own place. So NYCHA affords me a place to live. NYCHA are slum landlords. They need to come live in some of these apartments that people are living in. Like Lord, what you say your name is? Say your Miss Guatuque says she not had what you call those things, towels on the floor. That's some BS. I almost said a cuss word. That's some BS. How the hell we living without towels on our floor for years? That doesn't make any sense. That's ridiculous. We had an asbestos done to our building. Now let me tell you, the guys that was doing the asbestos had spacesuits on. And I said to the man, I said, you sure? Now he was an inspector. And he's a dummy too because he was an inspector. The man was coming outside. He literally had a spacesuit on. Where they did that asbestos, they removed the asbestos from our buildings. We had no kind of covering. They just put like a little piece of plastic. Plastic cannot prevent asbestos from going into my lungs. I could be having a lung problem right now because I got more lung problems right now from living in NYCHA. I live across the street from a dust buster. The dust that comes into our buildings is ridiculous, and they don't care. When we complain, when we call CCC, the 707, 717, 718, 707, 7771, they put out complaints and then they get rid of our complaints. Thank goodness for the NYCHA app because now I can see. I can write notes like they didn't show up today. But without that, if you don't have your records, and how many seniors can keep up with all the paperwork that you got to keep up to put down your complaints? NYCHA is a beautiful place, but they make us look like we're not human beings. Man, let me tell you something. I have done more stuff in NYCHA because I've done disability app right from that same apartment where I live in Redfern housing. And at first I didn't want to tell my because I don't want nobody to come to my house, and I will fight you if you come to my house. Tell you right now, I'm gonna bust you upside your head. You come to my door and you're not supposed to be. I'm like, I love God, but I will bust you upside your head if you show up my door. So I'm serious, okay? Because NYCHA has not served us like we're supposed to be served. We can't even speak to our manager. Right now, I can't even speak to my manager. I'm not allowed. I got a new manager, thank God. But the old manager, I could not speak to her. And when I asked my housing assistant, she said to me, I don't know. And I was like, what the hell you don't know, ma'am? You're supposed to know everything about my chart. I understand that you overwork, but you're getting paid a lot of money to do it. And my thing about it is that, do you really want to know about me? So the other thing that I want to talk about is that when Sandy came, when Sandy came, people got wiped up during Sandy. Then we had COVID. Do you know the damage that Far Rockaway alone, we was in the A line. The damage that we couldn't even come back. We couldn't even come back into our apartments. Thank God my father my father was able to help me get up the steps, and I had to stay in my father's house because every time I called NYCHA, they was like, oh, your apartment's open. It was a lie. The line to where the C hit was up to that light. How can I come back into an apartment and my elevator doesn't work? But they were saying, oh, Miss Scott, you can come back your building. No, I didn't. I had to leave neighbors. I had neighbors that died since Sandy. They died. You know why? Because we were not equipped. When Sandy hit, my neighbors had to be dragged out of their apartments. They did not have the resource even to get my neighbors out. I had a neighbor who was as large as I am, and she was bedridden. And I begged them to leave because I knew that they were not equipped to take care of us after Sandy. So these are the kind of things that we're dealing with. We're dealing with so much abuse. Yes, we want our house. We don't want it run by NYCHA because they are slum landlords. They need to come live in some of these apartments that have the asbestos. They need to have roaches and cockroaches crawling over them. That's what they need. They need to come live in those apartments where that's happening because that's what we're dealing with. All over the country, they're saying RAD and trust. They're lying. That's fake news. Fake news. RAD and trust is fake news. because it does not afford. Let me tell you something. We were just in a conference the other day with the NYCHA, the councilwoman of NYCHA. She and they asked a question. What about the one? If I'm in a domestic violence situation right now, I have to stay in a domestic violence because NYCHA says I have to go through all these paperwork before I remove. The lady from NYCHA said that out of her mouth. I was like, are you crazy? There are people who are living right now in domestic situations, and they have empty apartments, and NYCHA says because they didn't go through the proper paperwork or they didn't inspect the apartment. Let me tell you something. If I'm getting beat the pee out, put me in an apartment that got holes in it, but at least I got some peace. And NYCHA told them. NYCHA said to the councilwoman, which is a beautiful, Ramona knows her name. NYCHA told her, they have to be inspected before I take you out of domestic violence, and that's what we're gonna lose. If I go privatize, if we go privatize or RAD, we lose all of those things. So that means that if I'm getting beat up on a daily basis and I go private, I'm stuck there. I'm already stuck with NYCHA, but I'm going even more stuck because I'm losing all those services. If a new company come with jobs, I don't get access to a job because Section 3 covers all those things. Section 3 covers resident engagement. Resident engagement has helped us, has saved us. But we need help, y'all. And if we need y'all. Y'all sitting here, but we need y'all to come to our homes and see how we live it and talk to us because it's not fair the way they treat us. And they're trying to take our homes. I can't be out in the street. I'm gonna be one of them training myself to something because I'm not leaving my apartment. I refuse to leave, and I'm complete.
Thank you for that.
If I just wanted to make one quick point that I think people are not recognizing in what's happening with these privatizations, with these conversions. So in Section 8, you have a subsidy cap of 80%, I said it wrong, a qualification cap of 80% of the area median income, right? So if your household makes 80% of the area median income, you qualify. At 81%, you don't. For Section 9 public housing, recently in 2016, under the HOTMA Act, under the Housing Opportunities Through Modernization Act 2016, they increased it to, they capped it at 120% of the area median income, which is actually middle class household income stability. With the conversions, what they're doing is they're creating a permanent low income class population. They're putting a ceiling on it because people won't be able to jump from 80% to 120% to have that housing stability to actually make that accessible. Because now in a Section 8 apartment, if you are outside of that 80% for 6 months or more, they take that apartment off of Section 8, which means that now the market rate that HUD sets no longer applies. The private market rate would apply. So there's somebody who's paying $1,500 because of 80% may now jump over to $1,800 because of the HUD market, and then jump over to $3,500 because that's the private market rate. That is a key thing that's happening right now.
Like what the AMI at 80% and
so
20 is too?
The area median income is a determination of a medium household income in a particular area. Here in New York City is based off of the 5 boroughs, but also Rockland County, Putnam County, and Westchester County, which elevates the median income up higher. And then you have to make 80% of that, right, to qualify for Section 8, and 120% of that for Section 9. Prior to 2016, there was no cap on Section 9. You could make 200%, 300% of the AMI and still qualify for Section 9 because of the lack of housing stability anywhere else. Remember, the population of public housing is predominantly Black and Hispanic, right? And so housing stability outside of that, we're talking about 1969, 1970. Well, no, when Section 9 became Section 9, 1969 through now, right? So we didn't have that stability. Now we have it. Now they're taking it away from it. That 2016 qualification came under Obama. And that's the other thing too. So, well, if you don't have the 80%, if you make beyond 80%, you lose your subsidy. You're quicker to lose the apartment. And so now what they're doing with the conversions, 2 minutes, and what they're doing with the conversions now, if you're a public housing resident, they'll keep you at 30% of your household income in perpetuity. That means forever. Like, doesn't matter if you reach 120%, but then that also means that there's no cap for you. So if you're making a certain amount of money, you'll be overpaying that apartment. So essentially, they want you to eject yourself from the apartment, right? But now, if you're that public housing resident, you leave, that unit goes back to regular Section 8, where now you have that gross rent, that 80%, you lose it, right? So that is how they are treating us different, right? And that's a violation of the Fair Housing Act. This is HUD that's doing it. And so we have to also look at the actors that are imposing upon our community and how they are collaborating. And the last thing is, when we look at this ERAP, the Emergency Rental Assistance, which is a federal program. And the Treasury told the states that you got to be careful if you don't give it to public housing residents or Section 8 or federally assisted households, it could be a violation of the Fair Housing Act. And New York State created a law that took us out of it. And now they're justifying on the state law to not pay us. And so now we have our politicians now who should be like putting in fair housing complaint or should have stood against that kind of legislation, now imposing it upon us. So you have all of these state actors and federal actors that are trying to eliminate and destroy Section 9, essentially demolishing our community and changing the landscape forever.
The policing, the shift in policing. I wanted Manny to explain the policing shift that Teresa had.
So at one point,
The last thing.
Yeah.
and I'll do this in 30 seconds. So no problem. So at one point, public housing agencies would pay for the police, so the police would be specific to the housing area, right? So you're talking about housing enforcement, housing policy enforcement, and more localized. Then Bloomberg took that, incorporated that housing police into the NYPD, and was still charging NYCHA, I think, $70 million a year. And then they took away that focus on housing policy and just codified it, just made it right. Criminalized it. Which then we had the stop and frisk, which was a fair housing violation.
And vertical patrolling.
Yes.
Sorry.
Verticals are still there. It's just the fact that the way that they were approaching you. So if it seemed like South Africa, where apartheid in South Africa, if you didn't have your ID, you would go to jail. I went to jail because I ain't have my ID on several occasions. And so that was the level of interaction that they were imposing on us, and they continue to impose on us. And so because of things like that and everything we spoke about, I think public housing residents in New York City should be a protected class, because we need protection from all of these entities. And I thank you. Thank you so much.
One thing.
Do we have time for one last thing for Ms. Beverly? But then unfortunately, we won't go to public questions because we have to hop into the next panel. Okay, go ahead. And this will be our last. Is that okay? Well, we kind of cut into time, and I want to be respectful of the following panel.
I just want to say something about that medium thing. There are houses that, my area code is 1169. There are houses that are $500,000 or $100,000. So they don't always use our area code, which is a lower income. So that's why they get away with saying affordable housing, because they're using those expensive.
Hello.
She's saying instead of going at the neighborhood level for area median income, using this large population mass to give a median income is not representative of the actual neighborhood level.
Yeah, but one thing I did want to say about the trust, and people should know about the trust, is they deem it our homes uninhabitable to use this section, the 18. So, and then they're asking HUD to waive the inspection, which is really daunting. So that's just something I wanted to say. And also, I want to start a campaign to get the city and the state to give us the money of the marijuana sales and the cannabis sales, because, and to fund Section 9, because we was most affected by that movement.
Really fast, I want to say that 2 months ago, the inspectors came to my development. And before they came, NYCHA, for 2 weeks, they worked 24/7, 7 days a week for 2 weeks, cleaning, painting, making repairs, something that they should have been doing all year long to pass that inspection. So they have the opportunity, the resources to do it, but where is the willingness? This is intentional discrimination.
I want to, we can go on forever, and there's so many questions I have, but I want to thank everybody for being here and for sharing your expertise. So can we give a round of applause? And best believe we can do a lot of questions after the next panel as a group, maybe. Okay, thank you. Yeah, if you have any questions, maybe we can come back towards the end, maybe, and do a collective thing, Q&A. So please write them down. And for people joining us on the chat, please feel free to share it in the chat. Thank you so much.
So what happens when you give us mics, right? Yeah, we need a buzzer. We need a buzzer, a flag, a poster.
Yeah, let's do that.
How many chairs? Is it just the three of us?
Three of us, yes.
Okay.
I think. But I told Ryan that whenever Raquel's back, he will thumbs up us. So I don't know, maybe she can go after you, whatever. I don't know. Just a little bit messy,
we'll
but
just jump in.
yeah, let's do that. This shouldn't be like more
Does
like.
he know that Glyn is going?
Yes, he has.
Okay.
Where's the?
I know, where is this?
Should we go right away?
Yeah.
Are you ready? Yeah. So this is yours, right? It's already on the screen. Okay. Well, I don't know, something's going on.
How many people are on the?
He just, but I didn't see, but he has like the count in there. No, Zoom, no. I mean, in Zoom it's only Glyn and us. Yes, on YouTube. He has like 3 screens and like he was, but I didn't ask.
Okay.
So, yeah. What should we do? Should. I hate talking in public. Can we go?
Yeah.
Hi guys. Okay, so we're gonna continue right away because we need to finish at 2:30 sharp because there's another event happening. I'm Jaime. I'm from I'm not gonna introduce myself now because we are gonna self-manage this panel. Each of us are gonna introduce themselves when we start. But I just wanted to say real quick, thank you to everyone has come out today, especially this previous panel was inspiring, and I have so many questions as well. I hope we can make them in the end. And I also wanted to thank super quick CPCP, Mary Taylor especially, who couldn't be here today because she was key in organizing this. The Digital Collective, Selena Su as well. Queens College Urban Studies Department was great, and the People's Forum for having us. That's all what I wanted to say. So Kristen is gonna go first.
Hi, everyone. Okay, good afternoon. So I'm Kristen Hackett. I'm a doctoral student at the Graduate Center. I'm finishing my dissertation right now on the past, present, and future state of public housing and housing policy. And I've been organizing with lots of the tenant groups that were represented on the first panel for many years. And a lot of what I'm going to say today actually supports what they're saying and gives a little bit of a larger view and really brings in a conversation about social housing. And some of the reason why we're having this panel today is because the social housing policy fight is kicking off under a progressive banner in the United States, in New York City. And it's problematic, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to first look at the progression of social housing in the United States before I situate it in the larger context of changes in US housing policy and shifts in public spending overall. And I want to just say from the outset that my thesis, as derived from my larger research, is that this longer policy trajectory, which now includes some version of social housing, is more about reconstituting whiteness and racial capitalism at a structural level, which is happening through the financialization of the state, which is in turn driving financial expansion and driving wealth upwards and furthering the political and economic dynamics that make it difficult to fund and find political will to further any people-centered policy, public housing or otherwise. So social housing is not a new concept in New York City or in the United States or elsewhere. And today it's frequently used as an umbrella term to refer to a range of different housing models that to varying degrees emphasize the social value of the home and community over market values. This umbrella includes different types of decommodified housing, ranging from public housing to community land trust to Mitchell-Lamas and more. And this bucket of social housing is being used to promote a new model, a social housing development authority model, that are publicly backed but not publicly funded. Instead, they rely on speculative bond financing and what's called cross-subsidization, which is really a bastardization of subsidization because it means no public subsidy or funding at all. So in theory, those social housing developments would be self-funded, and this has consequences for the incomes of the households that they'll serve. So this model of social housing is being pursued in California and Seattle and DC and Maryland and elsewhere. And in all cases, there is also clarity that these programs are for middle-income households, and that what is going on with the privatization of public housing is a separate issue, completely unrelated to this policy trajectory, which I'm going to push back on a little bit by the end. But some of these programs also nod to lower-income households, but an individual living on less than $28,000 a year or a family of four living on less than $40,000 a year would not be eligible for any of the units that are being discussed as social housing. This exclusion is a racialized phenomenon because of the way race and class intertwine under racial capitalism. For example, if we look nationally, about 30% of Black households in the US earn less than $25,000 per year. Almost half of Black households earn less than $45,000 a year. So like people on the first panel spoke about, we're really talking about different income striations, and that's because of racism in this country. So it's valid to ask at this juncture, who then is social housing for? And in the end, I'm really arguing that social housing is really much more about resecuring a white middle class and resolving the internal crises and contradictions of capitalism to keep that going. And really, we need to understand the broader shifts in housing policy in order to understand this argument. So in the last Okay. So in the last 50 years, low-income housing policy has shifted from a focus on public housing to a focus on 5 policy programs. These emerged through various policy shifts of their own, but on the whole amount to a substantial shift in low-income housing policy in the United States, away from direct federal investment and towards a new public-private model of affordable housing provision that relies on private and nonprofit sector partnerships with government. This is a major structural change in our housing system, and it has consequences for whose interests are served and secured and whose are not, and operate along race and class lines. Okay. When we begin by, we can begin by considering the collective failings of this trajectory of policy, which is that after 50 years of experimentation with public-private housing, we have nothing to show but a worsening housing crisis. Lawrence Vail and Yona Freemark clarify this further by demonstrating that newer programs like LIHTC and vouchers offer shallower subsidies than public housing and serve higher income, low-income households, and leave less and less housing for households whose earnings are less than $40,000 or $50,000 a year. And through the continued loss of public housing through privatization, we're furthering this trend. And this isn't just a housing crisis, this is a homelessness crisis, as you heard again on the first panel. And that really is a full-scale crisis of care that jeopardizes someone's ability to care for themselves and others, to participate in society. It makes people more vulnerable to criminalization, and it can be a very lethal situation, of course. And it's a crisis predominantly for Black and brown households whose wages are kept low by discriminatory public policy and private sector practices. And this is a crisis that the current discussion of social housing sustains and exacerbates by overlooking and not engaging with. But this isn't all. The policy trajectory becomes further troubling when considered from a more technical perspective. So the larger policy shift is a shift towards relying on housing-related tax expenditures, which is tax credits and tax-exempt bonds, which all of the policy programs, including social housing development authorities, rely on. And in turn, it's a shift from direct federal funding, a shift away from direct federal funding, which just limits our capacity as a country to pay for housing, right? And even this policy trajectory is more costly to US taxpayers. It has been justified on the basis of the social and public benefits the programs offer, which I've already undermined. Instead, the only consistent benefit of these programs are the tax benefits that flow to the wealthy actors who come into possession of tax credits and bonds, whether that's through their own development or whether that's through secondary financial markets where a global pool of financial actors hedge their profit bets. This is significant for a few reasons. These financial tools are the connectors that tie people's everyday fates and housing futures to a global financial economy. And we only need to go back a decade to consider what the ramifications of that could be. But also, this shift is turning our low-income housing system upside down and into a tax haven that serves as an accumulation strategy for already wealthy people who are more likely white, while at the same time cutting housing options for low-income households who are more likely to be Black and brown. Social housing, as currently pursued, furthers this trajectory by opening up more investment opportunities for a global financial class under the guise of housing for all, which is to say that it is driving the uneven political and economic differences at a national and global scale that makes it very difficult to push good policy. In my larger research, I look at how global financial players are actually provoking these changes in housing policy through various nonprofits and other organizations that lobby for these policies under apolitical facades. And again, on the basis of public and social benefits without contending with the failings or the racialized outcomes of this trajectory. Additionally, sorry, I'm definitely missing slides. Additionally, I focus extensively on the public sector agencies, which are working closely in cahoots with the private and financial sector to promote this trajectory. All of these public agencies are structured similarly to the social housing development authorities, meaning they're bond granting agencies. And in taking up this responsibility for public debt, they also justify an unhealthy distancing from our democratic structures, processes, and representatives. This is yet another problem, especially if the debt burdens become too high. So in closing, however, I want to scale back down to everyday people and bring us towards another understanding of the relationship between social and public housing. And again, I want to look across time at this. So this is a dialectical relationship that cannot be separated because the because the dialectic or difference here really is essential to how capitalism's inner workings and systemic maintenance. Capitalism requires ever extreme inequality at the same time that it requires legitimacy. The former is created by rounds of racialized dispossession which drive wealth accumulation to the top, while stability and mobility for white people helps make the system appear honest and legitimate. And that this idea that it can work for some of us, that housing can provide some upward mobility, but that's really only been a reality for white households in this. So these are the tectonics of normalized white supremacy. And it's operating through the shift that the left is making to social housing and abandoning public housing. And that's my spiel on that.
So I think now we have one of our presenters online. No, is Glyn ready? He should be on Zoom.
Can you hear me at all?
Yep. We can see you though.
Hi, Glyn. Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, great. Okay. Can everyone in the room hear me? Somebody wave. Okay, great. Hey, well, it's great to see everybody. It's good to see the People's Forum again. I had some happy memories of that place from when I was in the city in 2021, and thank you very much for inviting me. It was, as ever, when I hear tenants anywhere, actually, but in some ways, especially where you are, I find it inspiring. And I learn a lot. But in a funny way, I want to try and teach you something based on experience in this country that is echoing like a thunderstorm, based on things that I heard earlier today, which is around this whole question of privatisation of public housing. I'm just going to show some slides, but I think we'll save that for another day for the sake of time. And I just want to focus in on, my screen's going really weird. Can people still hear or see me? Or most importantly, see, or hear rather. Okay. So I want to focus on bad impact and the things, and the Preservation Trust, the things I know are going on with NYCHA. Because council tenants in this country, and council housing is analogous to public housing. Council tenants in the UK have really got the t-shirt when it comes to the things you're facing at the moment. And what I want to start by saying is that this country, to a large extent, solved housing through public housing. Because in 1979, a third of the people in this country were public housing tenants. It was mainstream, it was normal, it was the opposite of residualized and stigmatized. But that was now, we're now down below 10% council housing, and privatisation has been the main motive for that reduction. And we had a very similar situation develop in this country to the one you're facing now. Eerie comparisons really, that from around 1997, with the election of the Labour government, this is an important point, a government that you might have thought of as progressive was responsible for accelerating the privatisation of council housing. Had an objective that they wanted to get rid of 200,000 council homes a year and transfer them into the private sector via a variety of different vehicles. And it was presented, much as it is being presented to NYCHA tenants now, as benign, as there's no downsides here. On the contrary, it's all upsides. You'll get your new kitchen, you'll get your new bathroom, you'll get your new landscaping, and so on and so forth. And what we argued as people who were living in or cared about council housing is that these were very loaded arguments, that they were biased and one-sided, and effectively this became a form of blackmail, that you either agreed to privatisation or you kind of self-condemned yourself and your family to living in substandard housing for the indefinite future. So we campaigned vigorously against privatisation. There were ballots, as I know there are going to be in NYCHA or some NYCHA developments, and although it's not perfect, and it wasn't perfect here either, it does give us an opportunity to put the counter arguments, although you have to fight very hard to make sure that voices are heard, that voices of tenants are heard first and foremost in the arguments against privatisation. But we won some ballots. We managed to hold on to thousands of council homes, of homes in the public sector, if you like. We didn't win them all. It was probably about 2 to 1 we lost because, as people were saying earlier, a lot of council tenants have become desperate to the end of their tether with disrepair and mismanagement and just think, well, I'm going to take the bird in the hand. But some time has passed and we now have the evidence of the kinds of things that you are already experiencing or perhaps are fearing. So what has privatisation led to? Well, it's first and foremost, some of the work that was promised was either not done or done inadequately. There have been a lot of complaints about the quality of the improvement work, if and when it even took place. It has led in lots and lots of cases to the demolition of council housing, of public housing. So council housing being erased, if you like, from our cities, and in particular cities and areas of cities where there were high land values. So this was a kind of land grab, basically, by private interests in the real estate industry. So demolition leads almost inevitably to displacement, and that has happened a lot here. We've seen communities shattered and scattered to the winds, much as Ramona was referring to in relation to Chicago. That has happened here as well. Tenants have had weaker tenancy agreements, again, thinking about that transition from Section 9 level protection to Section 8 level protection. Tenants here have had weaker tenancies post-privatisation, although they were promised that wouldn't happen. Tenancies are weaker. They were promised often that rents would not increase. That hasn't happened either. Rents have tended to go up. And again, this was something that tenants were assured would not happen. And of course, it's not just about what happens at the point of transfer or privatisation. We have to think about what's going to happen in the future. So even if rents are protected for a certain period of time, where are those rents going to be going in 5 or 10 or 15 years when your children or the next generation are going to be living in public housing? We've also found lots and lots of examples where the services, the day-to-day services, the management, the maintenance, the repairs, the caretaking, the groundskeeping has deteriorated post-privatisation. And that gets more and more of a problem when you have a less accountable landlord. Now, I take all the points about NYCHA and its shortcomings. Very similar things would be said about council house landlords in this country. But at least to some degree, they are accountable, publicly accountable. There are democratic processes that enable tenants to have a voice, albeit it's not perfect. But once you go down the privatisation route, you can forget that. And the agencies that have taken over council housing in this country are effectively private businesses, and you cannot get a place at their meetings, on their board. You are excluded. And then the other point that we argued again and again, and I'm sure you would do the same with your neighbours, is that once it's gone, it's gone. This is a one-way ticket. Public assets of any kind, actually, that are transferred into the private sector do not come back. So again, don't think about just now, don't think just about, and it's hard, I know, about your new bathroom or your new kitchen. Think about the future. What is this going to do, especially in a city like New York City, which I know well? The way I look at it, New York City will not be the same kind of place without public housing. But the last 2 points, we have done quite a lot of research to demonstrate that actually this route for privatisation is a bad use of public money. They say it's the only way to do it. Actually, it's a false economy. And we have found and done the research to show that actually bringing public housing or council housing up to a decent standard, the standard that tenants are entitled to, is better done through direct investment, through public funding, not through privatisation. The private sector, and I've worked in it, the private sector wastes money. We may have our criticisms of the public sector, but once you start exposing our homes to profit, you start losing control, you start losing accountability, and in the end, it all costs more, and the people who pay for that in the end are tenants. And the final point, and it was made brilliantly by somebody earlier about going to Washington and saying, we want our check. This is the thing we must never, ever lose sight of. The money is there. Thanks very much.
Did I follow?
I don't know.
Okay, so should we go with Raquel now? Since she's in Zoom. Hi, Raquel.
Hi. So, first of all, so nice to be here and hear horrible stories, but horrible stories from the voices of those who are struggling and fighting against those horrible stories. And what I have to tell you here, and I'm talking much more based on my experience as special rapporteur on the right to adequate housing, who put me in contact with Glyn Robbins and a lot of people around the world involved with the impact and consequences of this total paradigm shift from housing being a human right, a social policy, a very important part of community and community building towards the taking over of housing by finance. We have different phases, and privatization of public housing is one of the phases we have. With all the tones, public-private partnerships, Section 9, all kinds of arrangements with private regimes of control, of territorial control. And the thing that, and we have seen in the last, I would say, 40 years of history, depending on the specific economies of land and housing in each place, this is arriving everywhere. But also, what we are seeing is that the consequences of this shift is not better housing conditions, but worse housing conditions. Not more people having access to housing, but less people having access to housing. Not better conditions in the existing stock, but worse conditions in the existing stock, overcrowding, overpricing, and part of the things that we were hearing today. So what is the response to that? And I will focus on that because the responses have been everywhere. More finance into housing, more private control of housing through either home ownership or rental housing, including social rental housing as the new frontier of financialization of housing. Very clearly, very clearly. So the thing is, and I think that I will throw that in our debate here, is yes, we need public housing, but having said that, there is a lot of blackness in public housing, a lot of bad maintenance in public housing, a lot of non-accountability in public housing as well. So I think we should discuss the idea that there is, and I heard somebody, I'm sorry, I could not reproduce the name, saying we don't trust the state. We don't want state housing because we don't trust the state. We don't trust the state, but we absolutely don't trust the profit by private sector because private sector is something that is meant for profit, period. And in order to make profit, makes our lives very, very unbearable. So I think that more not the public ownership of housing stock, is the public nature of housing stock. And the public nature of housing stock could also be defined as, and I would put in these words, social control of the housing stock. I think social control is absolutely key, because sometimes, and there is a lot of experiences on state control of public housing with no voices for the tenants, state control of public housing without any participation of the tenants in the decision-making process of the regulations, of the norms, of the management. So I think that we should focus a lot on social control of public housing and open up also our minds and experiences on different types of ownership. And I would just throw them on because I think that there is a lot of experience going on cooperative housing, on community land trust, on other types of collective ownership of housing stock, which is not, it's public in the sense that it's appropriated in the public realm, but it's not privately owned by the state and under its exclusive control without the participation of the residents. So this is one thing that I would suggest. Another thing that I would suggest that is also very meaningful for our discussion, of course, to stop privatization of the existing public stock is very important in order to not lose more and more and more and more what we have, but we also have to rethink the ways and forms by which those public housing were historically managed, decided upon, and controlled. The question is not how many new public houses we need, how many new public units do we need, but also the question is how going to be the management of this stock in the future, how we can assure the control of the residents over the decisions of that, because basically, from what I heard in the previous panel, this is the crucial thing. This is the crucial thing. So yes, we are talking about the defense of public housing, yes. But I think on talking on the defense of public housing, we should also talk, or we should mainly talk about the nature of public housing and how much and what is public housing. So public housing reform should be a part of what we think about the state and their role on not only building management and what should be the absolutely essential role of the community themselves, and what type of tenure and what type of organization and forms of management could better accommodate and promote this social control. So that is basically what I wanted to throw in our discussion. Thank you.
Hi, yes, like we didn't introduce Raquel. Well, we said like we would do that ourselves, but Raquel is professor of architecture and planning in Brazil, in Sao Paulo. And now it's gonna be me. I'm Jaime. Introduce myself. Before, I am postdoctoral fellow in Sevilla in Spain, visiting here at CUNY Graduate Center. And I work on gentrification and planning, so I work on housing. in a way. But first and foremost, I consider myself an activist. And when we designed this, was like, oh, you need to talk about public housing in Europe and social housing in Europe. It's like, whoa. Europe's like 27 states, some of them federal states, which means like there's like 20 in Germany. There are like 25 different housing policies. So how do I do this, right? So what I've done, if Ryan can put up my presentation, there's like, I'm gonna introduce like very brief, like the 3 main regimes of housing that there is in Europe. And then I'm gonna talk about 2 cases, which are, you might have heard about them because they're on discussion even here in New York. But first, like 3 glimpses of what's going on in Europe, and we can see that on housing tenure. We have like one regime is like post-communist countries, Eastern Europe, which they had like a huge range of public housing when they were communist, and then were mass privatized all this housing in the 90s. And up to this day, like this, like mostly home ownership countries. Romania is like probably the pragmatic case. Not more than 90% of people own their homes, and this is creating a problem for especially young people who are entering the market, people who were born after the Berlin Wall fell, and also like migrants or people who relocate. It's a huge problem. So this is a model that we have in Europe that we don't want. We don't want also the other model, which is like super bad, is Southern Europe. So mainly countries like Spain, Portugal, Greece, some extent Italy, that were dictatorships, and they promoted home ownership as a way of social control, and also like lifting the banking system. Talking about the 50s through the 70s, when mainly developments were made. These countries have like 75% of home ownership, more or less. You can see it there. And yeah, not good either, because like, again, people who relocate, people who come from other countries, especially people who are vulnerable or unemployed, precarious, it's a huge problem to find housing. And there's like many, thinking about Portugal and Spain, for example, now there's many things that are going on at the moment, but any of them will help solve the problem because it's structural. And then we have like the final model regime is like the Northwestern Europe, which is usually like praised. It's like these are the countries that are welfare states, former welfare states. They're countries that after the World War I or even World War II, their system was mainly created by socialist democratic parties, and they managed, like the housing policy was the backbone of the social welfare. I'm totally off script here. And these are, for example, Sweden, Denmark, Germany. These countries today are more or less 50-50 homeowners and tenants. And they still have like a huge base of public housing, mostly, not all of them. Because the Netherlands, for example, well, when we talk about social housing in Europe, who said there's not a conversation, but there's actually a conversation happening, especially because of Eurostat that manages the data, and the OECD, they put together social housing, and they comprise in there like public housing, co-ops, and rent regulations. And these are very different models. The Netherlands, for example, has the largest share of social housing, but they don't have public housing. It's like rent regulations. And this is cool, but they have their problems. And now, actually, one of the problems that they have is like tourism, especially in Amsterdam. And now they have just passed a law that says, like, if you buy a house in the Netherlands, you need to live in that house for at least 3 years, because they're seeing how many buy-to-let operations, like investors come, buy the property, and put it on the rental market short term. I'm not gonna ramble about this because like we don't have time, but let me say that housing prices also, well, these housing prices accounts for the different models that we have. Prices have fluctuated a lot because of COVID and inflation, but the main point I want to highlight is like countries with fewer social housing units are prone to higher housing prices and worse conditions in general, right? But even when you have like a significant provision of social housing, that doesn't mean that your system is good, because we are seeing overburden rates going really high, for example, in Sweden, Belgium, and Austria. And I'm gonna talk about first Sweden, which I don't know if some people would know a little bit about this, because Sweden is a country that has been ruled by the Socialist Party for many years, conservatives as well sometimes in the national government, but mainly the Democrats. And they have they even had like I think they reached like 50% of their housing stock was public at some point in the 50s or 60s. But they have been, again, in this path that we are seeing like privatizations of the public housing stock. Well, what they have done with the public housing stock is like, well, the state one is totally either privatized or turned into co-ops. And then like this also like social, as I say, there's like municipal housing companies that they remain with some part of the housing stock. And these are the ones who are more or less taking like providing social or public housing for people. One thing I wanted to say about like, again, the concept of social housing is that the turning torso there, this is like the largest skyscraper in Sweden, in Malmö. These are co-op. So when we talk about co-ops, we need to also think about like they're rich co-ops. So that's like we need to be careful about this. And the other thing that I wanted to say is like the rent regulations are very strong in Sweden. Like all the rental market is regulated, public and private. And this is because they have a tenant union. This is the website there, which is like it has 500,000 people in a country of 10 million. So this is super strong. My point is like unionize. When people unionize, actually things go well because like I know the system how rents are going up in Sweden is complex, but they manage to and they negotiate with the government every year rent increases. The other point about Sweden is, I mean, there are many points, but the public housing is good quality. They have this very, very clear, and this is very important as well. And that rental contracts are what they call it security of tenure. They're forever. When you sign a lease, only if the tenant wants to move out, but you have your contract forever. That gives you a security either in public or not public housing. Private market, this is what matters, right? But yeah, the system isn't perfect because what I was saying before, the municipal companies are getting like they're getting more and more. It's getting more and more difficult to get a housing in these projects because they're reducing the stock, they're privatizing some of them. And also because they have become mainly, they used to be foundations or associations, and now they are nonprofits. But even though they are nonprofits, like they are limited companies now. So they are seeing like how investments cannot be undertaken, repairs, for example, if there are not yields coming. And the point about social public housing in Sweden, and the universal access to housing, is that a public company doesn't have to, have benefits. Like the benefit is social value. This is deficit. Okay, it's fine. The state covers it because like you are supporting like people who cannot access housing otherwise. And this is the point of Sweden that is being missed. I don't want to take much time, but like I need to talk about Vienna. I see Vienna here like all over. Like suddenly Vienna is like the paradigmatic case of housing. I wonder still red because it is actually still called Red Vienna because the labor socialist government it has been ruling the city since the 30s, I think, except for the period that was occupied by Nazis. But yeah, so it's like. It is true that they have a policy which is very important in terms of housing, public housing, and also it's like a city of tenants. Like this is like this is in German, but it's like 19% of people who live in Vienna are homeowners, 77% are tenants, and the city owns 25% of the housing is public stock, 43% is considered social housing, and in public housing in Austria is only 9%. So the city controls a lot of power, and they are invested in public housing. But Austria since like 20 years ago, they liberalized rent controls that they also had. they started privatizing some of the public housing, not Vienna, but the rest of the country. And then also like Vienna has like housing stock that they still own, but for the past years, the local government has left the provision of new housing to investors. So they are not building more public housing. They're building social housing. Social housing, again, like this is like companies, investors that come for profit. So this is shifting the paradigm from public to affordable housing, right? So I'm not gonna get into more details about this, but the only thing I want to say is like with the social housing is the difference with public housing is like if you want to get a nonprofit unit, an affordable housing, the tenant must make a down payment now. That wasn't a requirement in public housing. It's like it's calculated that it's as of today for a one-bedroom apartment is around 30,000 euros. This is a lot of money for people who cannot afford just like to public housing, right? So all these measures are actually generating a problem in Vienna, rising prices, the housing prices have raised 12% last year, and statistics about overburdened tenants are increasing, segregation is increasing, people who live in the country, especially migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, are being segregated, so social exclusion is growing. So Vienna is also not an example. That was my point. And to sum up, I wanted to say that public housing is about social value, as I said, and this round or wave of neoliberalization that we have, it is about recommodifying housing that this kind of states thought for a long time was like decommodified. We have public housing for the people because people needs to. We want people to have like the minimum welfare cover, and this is called collective care, in a way, right? So, but neoliberalism is like turning this down, and one of the things they are doing is shifting this conversation from public to social. And the only way, as we have seen here already, the only way to revert this is like keep fighting. Thank you.
Can everyone hear me? Good. All right. My slides are the one with the map on the first slide. Okay, hi everyone. I'm closing us out today, no pressure. So my name's Sneha, and I'm a housing researcher and doctoral student from Ottawa, Canada. And just so you know, that's where Ottawa is in respect to New York. I've spent just under a year in New York City, and I've been studying changes to public housing in both cities. So I've been looking at the RAD PAC program and the trust. And in Ottawa, what I'm trying to sort of formulate is an internal restructuring of our public housing provider, Ottawa Community Housing. And I've learned so much from the people in this room and the first panel, and I have a lot of gratitude for that. So in both cities, it appears like market interests, or what Kristen kind of described as financial actors and financial incentives, more broadly, whether they are by the state or by the private sector, are transforming public housing as we know it. And in Ottawa, I'm concerned with how public housing is being targeted for urban renewal in the name of increasing affordable housing supply. And tenants' homes are being demolished and redeveloped. So on the right is the first redevelopment project in Ottawa. 26 townhomes were demolished, and the development that was put up in place is on the bottom right. So through this, Ottawa Community Housing is expanding market-based affordable housing, where rents are determined as a percentage of market rate instead of protecting or expanding rent geared to income, which we've heard a lot about why that's really important today. So this is resulting in tenants being systematically pushed out of their homes and communities, despite being given a right to return before demolition, because they just can't afford the new rents. And I just looked up the rents at this housing development last night. It's actually gone up. A studio apartment, 420 square feet, is over $1,000 now. Instead, lots of money is going into building housing on land that previously held public housing that doesn't meet the needs of current tenants. So this research is making me think about a question that I think we all probably have on our minds. If the changes that we're seeing through things like RAD and the trust and what I described in Ottawa are not serving the residents who the state claims that these plans are for, then what is really happening? So to start answering this question, I think that we need to grapple with why and how housing of all forms is being made into a commodity. So this means that housing is now a unit of investment, it's an asset, it's being manipulated in the market. And I think Raquel touched on this a bit as well. This is especially important for rental housing because it makes less sense than homeownership or mortgages. And it's especially important for public housing, which as it stands right now is a form of decommodified housing. Our tenancy and rents and operation of public housing is not manipulated by the market the way it stands. So we're seeing all around us how wealth is being generated through land ownership and property and urban development. And this is happening in proximity to public housing. So Hudson Yards, $26 billion development in proximity to Chelsea, Elliott, and Fulton houses. And on the right, that's LeBreton Flats. It's a proposed development in Ottawa. It's going to be one of the biggest ones in the city. And you can't really see it, but clustered, kind of tucked around LeBreton Flats is a lot of Ottawa community housing. So I've spent some time studying the plans and documents of both public housing providers, and they're increasingly talking about public housing in financial terms. For example, they've recently said that they're seeking out new forms of revenue generation. They describe the need for proactive portfolio management of their properties. They talk about leveraging their land holdings to finance new urban development, and they're paying close attention to how rent is a form of long-term revenue. So we need to look at public housing authorities as landlords, and we need to look at the state and all levels of government as landowners in a context where land as property is one of the biggest sources of wealth generation, financial wealth generation. We need more modes of housing justice that contest all the ways that profit is made through land, whether it's being done by the state or the private sector. And we need to highlight the fact that this is at the root of what's compromising our rights to housing. So in tackling this topic, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm a settler on stolen land. Ottawa is unceded Anishinaabe territory, and New York is unceded Lenape land, and more. And Christina pointed out that this is a connecting point to the dispossession that is happening today. So acknowledging this is sometimes difficult because when we make claims to space, especially collective ones, we have to understand that these claims are taking place on land stolen from Indigenous people, and the processes that did that are the same processes that continue dispossession today. And sitting in this space reveals to us that our movement and settlement, whether it's forced or willing, is caught up in a web of global colonial past and presence, and this will only help us build networks of solidarity. This is a really cool website called nativeland.ca. They're building it around the world so you can go and see the Indigenous territories and languages and treaties on the land that we're on. Okay, so public housing authorities tend to be some of the largest landowners and landlords in their cities. As market interests continue to expand into previously protected areas of housing, entities like NYCHA and Ottawa Community Housing know that they're sitting on a massive amount of potential wealth because of this. But the public sector, so governments and public entities, have held power through land for a long time, which is something we need to also understand. It's not necessarily a new concept. Canada and the US are settler colonial societies. This means that those who colonized these lands stayed and settled here and often occupy positions of power and decision-making and governance, which is very intertwined with the possession of land. This power has been built on segregation and dispossession. We heard a lot about this already, of Indigenous communities, Black communities, Latinx communities, and Asian communities, and the dispossession of racialized immigrant and marginalized communities continues to hold up the power and wealth that we're seeing taking place through land today. And these actions work through institutions like the change and infrastructure changes that we see to public housing today that neutralize the role that racist ideologies and discriminatory practices continue to play. So what does, contesting land as a financial asset or housing as a commodity do for us in envisioning potential futures of communal, ownership over our own houses? And this is like a big question, so it's more a question I want to pose than answer. But one point that I would like to make, which is that in a lot of housing discussions today, when we talk about commodification, we hear about this divide. On one side, we have housing as an asset and a unit of investment. And on the other side, we have home as a basic right and necessity. And we know that the first one is being given significant priority over the second one, both by governments and housing markets. And yeah, on the right's my mom and sister. They look cute, so I put that up there. But I want to point out that thinking about these two things separately is maybe a slight misconception because they're happening in the same place. They're happening in homes and in communities, the very spaces that are needed to produce profit for people who are seeking out financial wealth are the things that we have claims over and rights to as tenants. So instead of looking at it as a divide, I like to think of it as an overlap. Home is where commodification happens, and the thing that's being manipulated by the state and by private investors are homes that people live in, not some empty, disinvested space. So on the bottom left is a photo by this photographer, Neil Rockwell, who documents eviction and dispossession. And he's kind of pointing this out in this photo because the community in this picture was a rent eviction, so tenants were evicted kind of slowly because it was a big neighborhood, but they still lived there watching these new buildings go up. And these weren't empty spaces, these were places where people still lived. So I want to end by talking a little bit about the practice of refusal, which I think we're already practicing today. We've heard a lot about it. So Indigenous and Black radical thinkers talk about refusal as a mode of collective resistance, a refusal to accept that we don't have claims to space, a refusal to leave our homes and our lands, and a refusal to accept that the only thing that gives us rights to space is money. So refusal is both like a collective visioning process of what the future might be, and it's also concrete political action. For example, rent strikes and withholding of rent is a very strong practice that has worked. Refusing the point the state makes that RAD and the trust are the only futures for how to repair homes, refusing the gimmicks of democratic decision-making and recognition that actually just divide us further, and refusing these progressive political rhetorics that are not prioritizing the people that we need to prioritize. All right, thank you.
Yeah, I know. Two questions, please. I'm asking them like, can we have like 2 questions, like 5 minutes?
history has proven that for some reason, when Black and brown people have issues that need to be addressed, and other organizations that have their issues, I won't mention any, but we all kind of combine the issue or jump on the bandwagon with regards to the civil rights movement. It just seems like we are not taken, not seriously, but not as important as the other groups. For some reason, that seems to be proven in history. I don't know why, or kind of do know why, but all I know is that other organizations that collaborate with us get more attention and more results than we do. And so I think that even though that's a good idea, that's something to consider, but for now, we're really focusing on this one fight, this one movement, and that's to save public housing from privatization. Even though we know that there's a diverse, cultural groups in public housing, most of them happen to be Black and brown people, but this is what we need to really focus on. And we are asking for everyone that would like to collaborate with us to come along with us, but to keep it as this specific focus for us. And then when we get that done with success, we can help you guys with your plights and your fights. That's my opinion.
Does anyone else have a question? And you could name it. It's white supremacy. We know. Sorry, and that's why we're here, because that's the interconnectedness. White supremacy being that hindrance for equitable housing. Does anyone else have a question?
Hey folks, thanks for being here today and for sharing your stories. My name is Jess and I'm a member of the Crown Heights Tenant Union. And we are fighting a related but different battle in Crown Heights as we fight to preserve rent stabilization, fight back against some really similar repair issues that y'all were detailing that you've experienced, and really high rates of eviction as well. And I think something that struck me is I was listening to the struggle that y'all have had in the fight for public housing and to fight back against privatization, is how in some ways, like the movements feel separate, but like the tenants' right movement is not always connected to the fight for public housing. And so I'm like wondering how we can, have a conversation about really linking those issues together, because they are related. The forces that are pushing folks out of their houses in Crown Heights are the same forces that are trying to push people out of their homes in public housing with many of the same goals. And so I guess I'm wondering, maybe for folks who have been doing this work longer, like, why does that divide exist? And how do we find a way to bridge those things so that we're fighting together? I think something that's been really confusing to me as we've talked about this in Crown Heights is folks have always been like, yes, we need to engage our neighbors in public housing. And folks are like, the rules are so different and we don't know what they are. Like the rules feel intentionally designed to keep us separate. And so, how do we figure out how to come together in this fight for all of our houses, for all of our homes, and for all of our neighborhoods?
That's so great. We don't have enough time to go over everything that encompasses, what we're talking about today, the focus on social housing and the public housing. But I will say that you're right, because what happens to us has a ripple effect. And for the homeowners, they need to, the issue of housing, okay, let's all come together with that issue of housing. But I'm not talking about LGBT, I'm not talking about, the other organizations, even though that's important. But if all of us can come together under the banner of the housing issue and the homelessness issue, then, and we listen to each other, we come out and we support each other's at the meetings and in our rallies and whatnot, because we all have a stake in this. It's a ripple effect, and that's something that we must consider. I was always thinking about when the hotels turn into the homeless shelters in places like Maspeth, Forest Hills, and whatnot, how those people came out in hundreds, and they've rallied 24 hours a day. They had shifts, and they went around and they stopped the hotel from taking in these homeless people. So if they don't want people there, then they should come and fight for public housing to stay public, okay? For the homeless people to be able to take over those empty apartments in public housing when there's a waiting list almost 2, 3, 4, 5 years long. And so that we can have our community, you can keep your community. We're still living, together in harmony, but we want to live where we want to live and be with who we want to be with, just like Chinatown, Little Italy, and all the different other communities. We work together and, we're still around each other, but sometimes it's good to just be at home.
No,
Guys, we actually need to finish now because there's some other event coming up, but we can continue the conversation here at the cafeteria or whatever, because I think there are many things left to discuss.
Yes, so can we give a round
I'm very sorry about this.
It's okay. No, the conversation's not ending. It's just moving. So round of applause to you guys, though, for a wonderful panel. Thank you. And one last applause for our residents. Hello, yes. Thank you so much for attending.